Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, still burdened by laryngitis, but that does not slow me down. I feel great. Laryngitis is one of those things you learn to live with in this business. Arthur Brooks is my guest. His brand new book, The Happiness Files, came out, and I read it on my D.C. to Little Rock to Manchester, New Hampshire to D.C. trek over the last 4 days, and I made 11 pages of notes, and I sent the notes to Arthur so he knows where I want to go and when I want to go there. But mostly he's going to do the talking. Arthur, congratulations. I love this book. I think it will change lives. I think that was your intention.
Thank you. That's the whole idea. Thank you, Hugh. And lovely to see you as always. I wish I were seeing you in person. We don't spend enough time together, and I'm reminded of that every time that we get to talk because you make me happy. That's what I have to say.
Yeah. Well, you point out in the book that the genuine things you ought to be looking for is family, faith, friends, and service. But happiness comes from that. I want to start, though, and make sure we get the major point I took away. Let's kill all the meetings. It's like a Shakespearean line. Why don't you expand on that and where it came from?
Yeah, sure. So this book, most of my books are published by Penguin Random House, and they're, big idea books. I have one coming out next March on the meaning of your life and how to find it, which is a lot of philosophy, a lot of behavioral science and neuroscience. This book actually is 33 essays that were the most popular essays that I've written over the past 5 years or so in The Atlantic, which is where my Thursday morning column comes out. So these are things that actually people have really reacted to well, and they focus mostly on work and how your work and your life can integrate with each other. So there's a lot of that theme. How can people work happier? How can they integrate their work into their life so that their work is not making their home life a lot worse? That sort of thing. And one of the things that you first mentioned is I wrote a whole column about meetings. And, I've been thinking about meetings for years. As some of your listeners might know, I used to be the president of the American Enterprise Institute, a big think tank in Washington, D.C. Man, I know meetings. And I've been a college faculty member off and on all throughout my career. And faculty meetings have been a part of my life. And I always tried to figure out what do they do to happiness? What do they do to productivity? And how can you actually design them? And so I did the research. And that's actually in one of the chapters of this book. You're going to have meetings in your life, but you can have a lot fewer. And when you do have them, they're kind of the rules for making sure that they're not unproductive and terrible and make your life worse.
I thought it was a wonderful, we had to clip it and send it to every boss out there in America, kill the meeting.
Yeah.
At the end of all this years that you've been writing on happiness for The Atlantic and your earlier book, From Strength to Strength, your book with Oprah, what percentage of behavior does Arthur Brooks believe is genetic, and what percentage of behavior is learned? Just generally.
Yeah, so 50% of your happiness is genetic, and that's based on identical twin studies where identical twins were separated at birth and adopted into separate families. And that's an almost ideal situation using basic statistics to figure out what part of your personality, what part of your behavior, but mostly your personality and your worldview, how much of it is genetic and how much of it is actually learned by different families. And it's about 50%, somewhere between 42 and 58% is genetic, which might sound like depressing, but it actually isn't, because when you know your genetic tendencies, then you can tailor your habits. So, for example, the same studies find that about 50% of your tendency to drink alcohol to excess, that's genetic. But, Hugh, if you came to me and said, hey, old buddy, both my parents drank too much, all four of my grandparents were bootleggers, man, I'm doomed. And I'd say, well, I got a special technique, Hugh, that'll make it so that you never have trouble with alcohol. A new way to change your genetics. It's called not drinking. If you know your genetics, you can actually tailor your habits. So another 25% on top of that is circumstantial, but that's very temporary. Your circumstances don't last, but the circumstances can be engineered with your habits as well. So here's the good news and the answer to the question, Hugh. 25% of your happiness is under your direct managerial control due to habits. Another 25% is your circumstances, which are made better with good habits. And with those habits, you can actually manage your genetic tendencies. And that's all that matters, therefore, is the habits that you keep. And there's four, and you just named them. You need to worship every day. You need to understand your spiritual or religious life, or at very least your philosophical life, and pay attention to it. You need to pay attention to your family relationships and not spoil them or waste them, especially for something as stupid as politics. You need to maintain your friendships. And that means real friends, not deal friends. All the strivers listening to us know the difference between real and deal. And last but not least, you need to find meaning in your work. You need to sanctify your work by earning your success, which is why capitalism is better than any other system for happiness, and especially to serve other people.
So, Arthur, what happens to people? You and I are both pretty good Catholics. You're a much better Catholic than I am, but I did the October, the first 8 days of November thing about praying for the dead. I did the work. So I'm a pretty good Catholic. But if you know what you should do and you don't do it, does that make you unhappy? If your spiritual life says do A
Yeah.
and you know that you're not doing A, does that make you unhappy?
Yeah, yeah, it really does. Actually, that was Carl Jung's theory of happiness, which is you have to know what you believe and then most importantly, act according to your own beliefs. Most people, they have certain beliefs, but they don't act according to those beliefs because they're cutting corners. So there's probably always time. The single fastest way that I can bring somebody into a happier place in their life is if I can root out their deep beliefs and then I can align their behaviors with those beliefs. Boy, their life is going to change just a lot. And this is why a lot of my students, I teach at the Harvard Business School, I teach MBA students, why a lot of them wind up going back to the faith of their youth because they'll come into office hours and say, I don't know. I don't know the meaning of my life. And I'll say, let's start by talking about what you actually believe. Do you believe God exists? How did you worship when you were a little kid? And they wind up saying, I miss it. I miss it, professor. I miss it. I say, okay, let's talk about getting you back in the pews. Let's talk about getting you back into the synagogue. And then they're so much happier because of alignment.
Now, another revelation to me was Maimonides' ladder of giving. I've read a lot about charity over the years because we do a lot of asking people for money. Like yesterday, we were raising money for the fund.org. But I've never heard of Maimonides' ladder of giving until I read the Happiness Files. Would you tell people,
Right.
They don't even know who Maimonides is, but they know he's an important guy.
Yeah, he was one of the three great philosophers of medieval times in Southern Europe. So, in Southern Europe, most notably in Spain, Southern France, and Italy, the three great Abrahamic religions were coexisting philosophically in real union. So, this is the 11th century, 12th century, 13th century. And the three great thinkers from the great traditions were Thomas Aquinas, who, of course, was a Dominican monk and a Catholic. Then you had Averroes, who was a Muslim thinker. And then last but not least, you had Maimonides, also known as Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon of the Jewish tradition. And Maimonides, I mean, he was a Neoplatonist. He followed Plato, also Aristotle. He brought this to modern audiences. A lot of what we understand today is because of these three great thinkers. And what Maimonides paid an awful lot of attention to was the fact that life gets better when you transcend yourself. It's very important to remember that the more you pay attention to yourself, the more miserable you're going to get, which Mother Nature wants you to do. Mother Nature doesn't care if you're happy. She just wants you to pay attention to you. It's like Hugh all the way down all the time. And Hugh needs relief from Hughness. And the way that you do that is by transcending, to transcend to your relationship with the divine, and also transcending by serving other people. To that latter extent, Maimonides actually created a scale of the beauty and revelation, and especially the happiness that you'll get from different kinds of giving. And at the very top is giving in which they don't know that you're giving. You're giving out of the goodness of your heart. You might not even know who you're giving to, but somebody who truly needs it, and they actually can't come and thank you, thus spoiling the pure virtue and joy that comes from transcending yourself in this very, very genuine way.
You know, I put a note in the book that people who put their names on buildings at colleges may be missing the point. Or maybe they're fulfilling a need, but they may be missing a point. Let's talk about catastrophic failure or catastrophizing failure and why maladaptive misery is so dangerous. I thought that was a great reveal, Arthur.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the truth of the matter is that Homo sapiens, we almost every weird thing that we do actually comes from the evolved evolutionary environment. So we still have brains that were made for us about 250,000 years ago. They're not very different at all. That's in the early Pleistocene, when Homo sapiens lived in roving bands of 30 to 50 individuals that were extremely hierarchical and kin-based. And what you were paying attention to all day long was how to rise in the hierarchy, how to stay close to your kin, and how to avoid disaster. Those were your three big things that you were doing all day long. And avoiding disaster meant that you had to pay attention to threats a lot more than to opportunities. So opportunities are great. You know, find some berries on a bush, you find a couple of gazelles around a watering hole. That's terrific. That'll make your day. But you really, really want to be attuned to all kinds of negative emotions like fear and anger and disgust, which is your way to avoid pathogens, and sadness, so you don't get kicked out of your tribe because you'll die immediately. And so the result is we have more brain tissue dedicated to negative emotions than we do to positive emotions, about 2 to 1. That's why everybody is such an ungrateful wretch all the time. I mean, me too. I teach the science of happiness. I teach neuroscience of happiness. And I found myself saying the other day, first class on United Airlines has really gone downhill. And I thought, oh man, listen to you. It's like you should be grateful. But that's why gratitude is hard and ingratitude is easy because of this negativity bias. But if we let it run, man, if we let it run, then what it's going to do is we're going to catastrophize everything. We're going to be miserable all the time. And that means we need to live in the space, not of our animal impulses, but of our moral aspirations. We need to stand up to Mother Nature and say, no. I will not catastrophize. I will not be negative. I will not be ungrateful. I'm going to make a positive effort to live in the parts of my brain that are not emphasized according to evolution, but we can emphasize them by our own volition, our own modern selves.
Now, I want to get to the trophy wall, Arthur. I have seen a lot of trophy walls in my time. I've got the makings of one, but I've never put it up because I think it's almost embarrassing when people would see it. It's shaking hands with W, shaking hands with RN, that sort of stuff. But you had quite a great reflection on vanity walls. Would you share that with people? And I don't mean to condemn anyone that's got it, but it might be what's bothering them. So let's tell them about it.
Yeah, that's right. And what vanity walls basically are a kind of a monument to your past successes. And there's this theory out there that when you're having a kind of a down day, if you look to your past successes, you'll say, I'm not such a loser. Look, I met the president. I shook hands with the Pope. The governor, I had a citation from the governor for having the best car dealership in Western Iowa, whatever it happens to be, right? And that's great. The trouble with it is that actually they bring you down. And the reason is you're constantly comparing yourself to others and even to yourself. And when you look at past successes, especially in moments where you're not enjoying current successes, what it makes you think is, man, I used to be the king of the mambo. And, now look at me. Now that I'm, things aren't going so great for my car dealerships in Western Iowa. That's not so good. I mean, for me, I could have pictures of me shaking hands with the Pope and I would say, look at that hair. I had hair like Hugh Hewitt, but not anymore. And that's an invidious comparison. When you make a comparison with yourself and you realize that something was going better for you in the past, that's the opposite of progress. And human beings only get consistent satisfaction from making positive progress.
You had some kind of really great term that was so scientific sounding, it was designed to impress. I mean, I was blown away by it. Do you remember which term I'm talking about?
No, I don't, because there's a lot in these days. 30% of my teaches. Self-referential what?
I'll find it at some point. I want to move on.
I'm an academic.
I want to move. Yeah, and you want to produce stuff that gets into the journals, and I wrote that down, and I loved it. Let's talk about learning to say no. It's a problem for me, so I want to learn how to get the yes bias going.
Yeah, so this is the thing. Strivers, which, boy, you're a striver par excellence, Hugh. I've never seen you still. And you're at a time of your life where a lot of guys are playing golf, but you're traveling to a new state every single day, and you've got the podcast, you've got the show, you're I mean, you're adjudicating presidential debates. You're everywhere all the time. That's what strivers actually do. Strivers have two big fears. They have two major fears. Number one is failure, and number two is idleness. Idleness, they hate idleness. They hate idleness even more than they hate busyness. Now, if you come to me in some years, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years in the future and say, hey, Arthur, can you help me design my retirement? I've done that for a lot of really successful people. I'm kind of the billionaire whisperer at this point. And I would say, yeah, let's talk about it. I'd say, what's the thing about your schedule you hate the most? And I know what it is. You're too busy. You don't have time to do a lot of things that you actually want. You don't even have time between meetings to pee. And that's not great. So I would say what we're going to do is we're going to keep you busy, but we're going to give you more time between the things. So we're going to actually create not so much connective tissue between everything. So you got a little bit more space. And then I'll start slowly weeding out your schedule, because we have to get over your fear of idleness. Now, that fear of idleness is made manifest during your career in an inability to say no. Why? Because, if you say no to something, maybe that nothing will fill that slot on your calendar, and you'll just be some loser in 7 months, which is why if you come to me and say, hey, old buddy, how about if you come and give a speech at my granddaughter's bar mitzvah and make some balloon animals in Fairbanks in February? What do you say? I'll say, Yes, I would love to do that because I'm afraid that 7 months from now, I'm going to have a hole in my schedule, and that freaks me out. And that's what you got to get over.
And we also, if I remember correctly, we overestimate the rejection that will follow from saying no. In other words, we credit
Yes.
ourselves with too much worth, and we don't credit the person making the ask with enough maturity to understand no is sometimes necessary.
That's right. Most of the time, we overestimate when we say no. Somebody asks us to do something, and we say no. They say, "Oh, okay." They say, "That's okay. That's fine." You say, "Can you come and give a talk at the church?" And you say, "No, I can't do it that day." They say, "Okay, maybe I'll ask you next time." And you say, "Fine." But in the moment, you're thinking, "Well, that's really going to put a crimp in that particular relationship because it's gonna bug them." And part of that is just that we have big egos. We think that their whole event or whatever it is resting on our particular presence. And what was they said, I think I'm going to get Arthur to come talk to that thing. I'm going to ask Hugh if he can, do that thing. And then and when you say no, they say they'll move on to the next idea. Is kind of how it works. You shouldn't worry so much about it because for the most part, I hate to say it, it's almost a bigger problem. People don't care.
People don't care. Now, I took a lot of interest in your genetic evolutionary acceptance, as I did. I had 1974, one of my classes, we had to read The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. It made a lot of sense to me then. It's not at all incongruent with believing in Jesus Christ. It just isn't. People who think you can't believe in evolution and be a Christian are just wrong. But the evolutionary techniques that developed over millennia are not particularly good for the acceleration of the technology with which we live today. And I think what you're really getting at in the happiness files is how do we get rid of the bad evolutionary techniques that were really great, maybe even 7,000 years ago, but not today?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. The truth is, evolution is a marvel, and it made it possible for the ancient Hewitts to pass on their genes such that you can do the marvelous stuff that you do today. But it doesn't actually, number one, lead to adaptive and proper and even healthy behaviors today, because a lot of the stuff is maladapted, kind of like this tendency to be suspicious, hostile, and ungrateful and sad, when most of life is actually really wonderful because we live in America and we're actually not under threat most of the time. And the other part is just remembering that Mother Nature and evolution, they don't care at all about your happiness. Mother Nature couldn't care less. Mother Nature has only two goals for you, which is survival and gene propagation. That's why I teach what I do, so that people can understand that they were given this marvelous prefrontal cortex. That's the executive center of your brain, the brain tissue right behind your forehead. That's the C-suite. That's the console of tissue where you make conscious decisions about whether or not you're going to act according to your animal impulses, or whether you're going to act according to your moral aspirations. And you got to make decisions all the time. So how do you make decisions? The answer is, number one, you have to be informed. The reason I write about the science of happiness all the time right now is I want people to be informed. I want them to take a real kind of a scholarly interest in themselves and in their brains and in their biology and in their psychology. And people find it super fascinating because they realize they have a lot more control than they ever knew. And then when they do that, they can actually consciously change their habits. They can teach other people. And they'll say, wow, I used to do this thing just without even thinking about it. Now I don't do that. I'm so much happier. I hear that every day from people.
Two questions unrelated to happiness. Number one, the audio version of the Happiness Files, which I actually paid for because I wanted to listen to the book while I was doing all this traveling this weekend. You read the intro, and then you had a professional narrator do the rest. Why did you make that choice? Because you were fabulous in the intro.
Oh, I thank you. I appreciate that an awful lot. Generally speaking, I read all my own books, and I'm starting a series of these column-based books, but sometimes they run into what I'm doing for the other big books. And I had this great big book on the meaning of life that's coming out in March, and I was so hot and heavy in the last chapters, and you know how it is when you're in the final edits of a book where your wife is passing pizzas under the door to you at 2:00 in the morning, that there was just no time to do anything else. So that it was nothing more than a time constraint.
And then I did not know until I read the Happiness Files that you were, as I once was, a smoker. I smoked from age 20 to 40. Why? When did you smoke? How much did you smoke? And why did you quit?
So I started using tobacco, actually by chewing tobacco when I was a kid, when I was 13 years old. And stupid, a little bit of adolescent rebellion. And I got hopelessly hooked in about 30 days because your brain is highly plastic, meaning that addictions, they rip through, man, when you're that particular age. And I used tobacco in various forms, mostly smoking by the time I was 18 or 19 until I was 26. And then I had an event that actually got my attention. I knew I needed to quit smoking. It was bad for me. I was actually a professional classical French horn player. I used my lungs. That wasn't going to go anywhere good. It made my parents sad. It was just stupid. And I knew I had to quit. And I tried 1,000 times. I didn't have the willpower for it. And I kept going back and back and back. And then I got married. And it was, and we were sleeping in our new bed, and I was being a real grown up. And my problem was I was such an inveterate smoker, Hugh. I just couldn't go. I couldn't even go all night. And so I would wake up at
Oh my
3 or 4
goodness.
in the morning, and I would smoke a cigarette, and it was just hopeless. And so one night at 4 o'clock in the morning, I smoked a cigarette, and I didn't finish it before I went back to sleep. And I woke up in the morning, and there were about 10 holes burned in my bed with my wife in the
Oh,
bed. And I said to myself, buddy boy, it's one thing to kill yourself, it's another thing to kill your soulmate. And I quit.
okay. That's a very dramatic, much better story than mine, which is my brother told me I could recover lung capacity and run faster in marathons if I quit smoking, which I did not know. All right, let's
Also
talk
true.
about money.
Also true.
Arthur,
Yeah.
I thought your talk about money between $50 and $200,000 a year is less stressful than under 50 or over 200K. So it's kind of
Yeah.
a sweet spot for income. I expand on that
Right.
because that will shock a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. So what happens between, of $50 and $200,000 a year is you eliminate the sources of hassle and stress from your life. Systematically, you do that. And I remember that. I mean, I remember when from 19 to 25 when I was a professional horn player. I didn't even go to the dentist. I didn't have any health care. I couldn't go to the dentist, and I needed to go to the dentist. Then at 25, I took a job in a symphony orchestra, and I had benefits, and I had some money for the first time. And I went to the dentist, and he filled 12 cavities, and I felt better. I thought, wow, money buys happiness. It doesn't. It eliminates the sources of avoidable unhappiness. That's all money ever does for you, unless you're doing something like improving your relationships with it. But that's a special case. We could talk about that if you want. Now, the problem is when you're making a lot of money, 200,000, 250,000, millions of dollars a year, for the most part, you're doing something for money that's net stress inducing in your life, and you're no longer eliminating sources of unhappiness. And the result of it is net, it's actually not that helpful for you unless you know how to spend it. And that means not actually making it so that you can pay for the Ferrari or make the mortgage payment that's a little bit beyond your means because you're trying to impress the neighbors or trying to impress yourself, trying to be a big shot. Rather, what you're doing is you're actually making it so that you can have experiences with people that you love. You can buy time and use the time doing something that's meaningful and service oriented, that you're putting into the bank for intergenerational wealth or to have security in the future, which is something that will bring a lot of happiness, or to give it away. To give it away to your church, giving it away to people who actually need it. Those are the 4 ways that money over $200,000 won't make your life worse. It'll make your life better.
And the fact that you stress giving it away repeatedly throughout the book in the happiness files impresses me because it's congruent with my experience, but it's also been told to me about 1,000 times, and it's always true.
Yeah.
I did not expect Schopenhauer to be in your book, Arthur. Did you when you set out to write the column that he appears in? Or Jung, for
Yeah,
that
no,
matter. I didn't think Carl
Yeah.
Jung would get all that praise.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the interesting thing about actually being a weekly columnist, as you know, is that you're always learning. It's like being in graduate school again. So I read 15 to 20 academic journal articles a week. And it's like I'm working on my PhD again. It's just an extraordinary thing. And I just love it. It keeps me fertile and young, intellectually, et cetera. And I'm also always branching into areas that I don't have a background in. So my PhD is as a behavioral scientist. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I've had to retrain in the academic literature on neuroscience. But I've also had to retrain understanding philosophy in ways that I never did before. There's serious philosophy and, different schools of thinking. And the reason for that is this. All the best questions in happiness come from philosophy and theology. Then you have to understand the mechanism of action, which is how the brain works. Because psychology is just biology, and so you need to know neuroscience. And then you have to look at actually how it stands up in people's lives, and that's the psychology before you actually even give advice to people how to live differently. So once every 5 or 6 weeks, I read an essay about a philosopher I've always wanted to know about, but didn't. And one of them was about Jung, and a couple of them have been about Schopenhauer, this 19th century crank who was grouchy about everything and had a terrible relationship with his parents, and people didn't like him, and he wasn't even esteemed or respected during his lifetime. But since he died, people have looked back on it and said, "Wow, this guy's done some really, really significant things in terms of understanding how life works." And I have a newfound respect for the old crank just by reading his work to learn about it.
Well, it's very, they're both very well discussed in the Happiness Files. Now I want to talk to you about something. The Happiness Files had gone to bed before Diane Keaton and Robert Redford both died. So I have a two-part question. They achieved and maintained a level of fame for 50 years, and they were very good at what they did. But you can't keep doing what they did. You're on a arc of inevitable decline if you're a movie star.
Right.
Is that a good choice for anyone to make, to pick an arc of inevitable decline?
It's not for happiness. I mean, it might be because this is the only thing you're good at, or you fall into it and you need to make a living, but if you actually want to be happy, you can only ever be happy in spite of being famous. And so if I dig into the lives of anybody, people who are, major public figures, and I've worked with some like Oprah Winfrey, who's just probably one of the most famous five people in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's extraordinary. And she has actually cracked the code. And the way that she's done it is recognizing that the fame that she has, I mean, she's the same person when we're having dinner together at her house in California as she is when we're on stage in New York. Because I've been on tour with her before. We've written a book and et cetera. We've actually performed together. She's the same person. But the reason is because she recognizes that the fame and power and fortune that she has is such that she can refract those lovely things to lift other people up. She sees them as an opportunity to make a life of service. So she's profoundly happy, but not because of those wonderful things, but because those are instrumental in getting the things that she really wants, which is to serve other people. And that's really the secret. If you're trying to be happy through fame, you will fail. That's just the fact of the matter. And I know a lot, and you and I both know a lot of very unhappy famous people. And trying to maintain their fame per se is like drinking seawater. The more that you drink, the thirstier you get. You can never get to the end of it. And then the worst thing of all happens, which is that you lose it because the party inevitably ends.
Okay, Arthur, two more questions. The first is, among young people, there is a thirst for fame. They want to become influencers.
Yeah.
I think it's because they think it's a way to make a living without working hard and having fun, which is not really possible in my view. Do you think we're doing enough to warn them that fame is illusory?
Yeah, I don't think we're offering them enough good counsel. And there's a reason, actually, an evolutionary impulse to want to get famous, which is you want to rise in your hierarchy. Now, remember, our brains make us understand fame as being better known and better respected among 30 to 50 people total. That's it. We can't accommodate the idea of living in a community of 1 million people. Internet famous is actually well beyond our cognitive capacities. Our brains can't handle it, which is why child stars who get really famous before they're about 15, they wire their neurochemistry to only get rewards when they're getting applause from strangers. Their brains, under brain scans, look like those of methamphetamine addicts. And they're miserable. And then when inevitably they grow up and things change, then that's why they go crazy. That's why all these tragedies happen to them, because they're like teenage drug addicts. And that's what fame will actually do. And that's what we have to warn people about. The very worst, most abusive thing that you could do as a parent is put your kid in commercials and try to make him into a Disney star.
A second Arthur Brooks has appeared, but I haven't read her work. Her name is Emily Oster. As often as I cite your book, and yeah, but she's great because she's telling moms basically what to worry about and what not to worry about and how to raise children. Are you going to delve, my last question, are you going to delve into that area with John Haidt and Emily Oster and talk about raising children in this ridiculously complex world of interconnectedness and accelerating speed?
I am. That's my next book, The Meaning of Life. The reason that the technology that we talk about is so deleterious in the lives of people and the screen time is so problematic, especially for young adults, that's what I talk about. What is missing from life? The answer is the sense of life's meaning. Why? Because we're literally foreclosing activity in a part of our brain that's necessary to find the meaning of life. which is specifically the right hemisphere of the brain. The right hemisphere of the brain is the mystery side, is the meaning side, is the love and happiness side of the brain. The left side of the brain is the technology side, is the task side, is the efficiency side. We're becoming more of a task-oriented technological efficiency society. And the people who don't remember the before times like you and I do, they spend all day long in school and work looking at a Zoom screen and trying to get ahead, and all night long looking at the little screen going zoom, 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 scrolling. And the result is the right side of their brain is off. That means meaning is inaccessible. And that explains the explosion of depression, anxiety, loneliness, sadness, and self-harm in America today.
Well, then, Americans, you got to read the Happiness Files while we wait for Arthur to come up with the new book, a title yet to be unknown, but I hope you will join me to talk about it at length, Arthur, when it does show up. Thank you for your half hour today. I appreciate it immensely. I hope the Happiness Files is doing well.
Thanks. Doing great. God bless you, Hugh. It's great to see you.